Alrighty. Hey folks, Dennis here with Las Vegas Worm Farm and Living Soul Community. Let's talk about something real quick. Earlier in the community, we talked about or posted something in there that stated, let me see if I can pull it back up. It was like a quick check, and it was like, what do you think is most important, for plant health? And the real answer is the most important thing is soil life, right? Like you gotta have soil, you gotta have the life in the soil, or else you don't have plant health at all. And that kind of brings me to the topic of organic material in the soil. Excuse me, still got this cough. So, what I really wanted to talk about is um,
Yes.
when people add compost, right? They think adding like this magical thing onto their soil, right? And it's gonna fix all the problems. And the crazy thing is, like, no, that's not the answer, right? Like, it's a food, right? We talk about this in the community. We talk about air, water, food, right, and microbes, right? And the four principles that we talk about when it comes to a living soil. But the crazy thing is that people get stuck on this thing and they think that compost is just going to fix everything, and it just won't. It'll fix some things, right? Yeah, but it won't fix everything. So the main reason that I think when we talk about compost as a fertilizer and people are like, yeah, you got to add fertilizer, right? It's just true, right? We do have to add fertilizer. It is a food source, not for our plants, for the microbes, right? Whole nother topic, which we might get into, but probably not today. Um, but we have to add compost to it. The problem that I see people run into though is that you just don't add enough. Most of the time, it's wintertime right now, but spring is coming around the corner. People aren't thinking about gardening right now. Maybe they are. Maybe they're starting some seeds and something like that, right? But they're not thinking about the soil that they're going to put their plants in or their transplants, right? They're not thinking about that right now. And that's a huge issue when we're talking about living soil and keeping the plant as healthy as possible, right? So when it comes to soil life, we got to keep the soil healthy so the soil can keep the plant healthy. Well, the problem you run into is that when people are adding this compost to the soil, they do it once. Usually, it's in the springtime, right? That's when you add that's when you add your compost to the soil because you're like, I'm gonna plant my plants. I'm gonna put the compost in there. It's gonna feed my plants, and everything's gonna be good and happy. Not gonna really work like that. It will work like that a little bit, but not necessarily. And it's what you're kind of doing. The way I kind of like to relate to this is kind of like you go to a restaurant and you have all this food in front of you, right? But then they give you this tiny piece, this little piece about this big, and they're like, "Here you go," and you're like, "That's it. This is what I." But there's all of that over there, right? And you're like, "I want all of that," and you're like, "Nope, this is what you get." This is what we do when we add compost once. We give the soil. So most of the time, people think it's the plant. We give the plant a little bit of food, just this tiny little bit. We're like, here you go, and we hope that that's going to be enough to feed that plant. In all actuality, it's not feeding the plant at all, right? But that's not even nearly enough to keep that plant as healthy as possible. Not even close, right? We're literally starving the soil at that point by adding just that little bit. So my recommendation is always right when you guys have heard me talk, and it's always 3 times a year, minimum of 3 times a year, add compost 3 times a year, 3 times a year. And this is specifically what I tell people to do here in Las Vegas, but it's a bare minimum requirement for pretty much anybody that's growing out there. Now, if you're growing heavily more intense, of course you got to add more, right? But excuse me, still trying to get rid of this cough. But that's the biggest thing is that we tend to starve our plants, and we think that they should be running on bare minimum, and it's kind of like running your car on E. It'll run. You might go some places, but you might not get to where you think you should be, right? And all of a sudden, everything's gonna just stop. The car is gonna stop. You're gonna be upset, and that's what happens with plants when you're not adding enough organic material to the soil. You gotta add more compost, more organics to the soil, right? That is feeding the life in the soil, and that's what keeps us alive. The biggest problem is you're starving your plants. You're not adding enough. If you think you add enough, you're not. And we'll talk about why that kind of goes into there. And people think that they're adding enough, right? And they're boosting it, and they're like, "Yes, I'm gonna add this compost. It's gonna be good." And it's like, "Yes, you are, but you have to keep adding it." It's a food source. Earlier we talked about, you give them, there's a little bit of food. It's a little bit of food, not a lot of food. That food's gonna get eaten up. Then what? Then you got to feed again, right? You got to keep feeding the system. A living soil is one of those things, right? Plants are one of those things that you got to keep feeding it and keep feeding it. And this is where a lot of people go with liquid fertilizers and liquid amendments and things that feed the plant. We talk about this in the community, and I won't talk too much about it here, but some of those fertilizers feed the plant, right? And if you're doing that, by all means do it. It works, right? But when we're talking about a living soil and growing organically and using what Mother Nature has provided for us to grow the plants that we want, we feed the soil system. We're not feeding the plant, but you have to continue to feed the soil system. Now, do you have to feed it as much as if you're doing, like traditional agriculture or traditional growing, where you're putting in NPK every month or so? No, absolutely not. We don't have to feed that system that often, right? The microbes that we're feeding in the soil, they take time to break these materials down, which in turn feeds your plant, right? So you don't have to feed it as often, and this is why I say 3 times a year, right, at a minimum. But you have to continue to feed it. So this year, or actually what I just got done doing is chop and drop, right? It's just the process of where I take all of my dead, dying things or things that I don't want to look at anymore, right? I cut it down and then I run it through a wood chipper and then I put it right back to where it was. Nowhere in there do I yank out plants, but I'm chopping and dropping. I'm chopping them down. I'm running through my wood chipper. It goes back out there, and then I cover everything with more organic material, compost, right? So I'm taking the dead things that are dead. I'm feeding the soil system again, and I'm adding more food to that system. The way I like to relate to this is, you ever seen your garden beds that you made, whether they're raised beds or in the ground, they sink, right? All of a sudden you look at the wall where it's at and the dirt level used to be here, and then now it's down here. What happened? That is the organic material being eaten up. The microbes, the plants, the critters, crickets, detritivores, right? Roly polies, you name it, they're all eating that food, and that's why that stuff goes away. And this is why the main problem you have is you're not feeding enough. Everybody's eating that organic material that you put on there. It's not just, the plant that you gave it to. It's also that cricket, that roach that you didn't see that comes out at night, right? Like it's the roly polies. It's also the springtails if you have those. It's the mites, right? The worms are decomposing organic material. The microbes are eating. It's all going away. So you have to continually feed the system. So in order to get that right, you got to get a solid foundation. You have to add all of that food in there, right? Food, compost, organic material. And this is one of the things that we talk about: air, water, food, and microbes, right? The four principles. Food is a must. You have to do it. Right now, that's something that I'm doing. I always tell people that, 3 times a year, which is Valentine's Day, Memorial Day, and Labor Day, as long as I can get it in the ground before or on the ground before Valentine's Day, I think I'm doing okay, right? And at this point, my beds have sunk a little bit more. Even though I put compost, I probably end up putting a little bit more just because I had a lot of growth last year. There were a lot of things growing, a lot of things used all of that food up, right? So I have to replenish that stuff. The biggest myth I think that's kind of out there right now is that you can just add a little bit of compost and just fertilize, and you can kind of walk away and you're good to go. And it's just not true. You need so much more, uh, and I mean so much more. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But you can't just feed a little bit, right? Like you have an entire bag of compost. You shouldn't have any compost left when you're done. You should be using all of it. Yes, all of it, the entire bag. Put it out there, let it get used up, and then go get more. You have to put a lot out there. When I say a lot, let's run through some numbers on what I mean about a lot. In this example, I'm specifically going to use Las Vegas because I know what our soil organic matter is in Las Vegas. And what we're going to kind of talk about here is the amount of minerals in the soil and the amount of organic material in the soil. In Vegas, we sit somewhere between like zero point 0.4 to maybe 1% if you're lucky, but you're usually hanging out about half a percent, which is terrible. To scope this out, zero point 0.4 is terrible. In order just to kind of grow something bare minimum, we kind of want to be at 3%. When we get to a place where we really want to be is above 5%. 5% organic matter in the soil, then our plants are starting to like, oh yeah, I can grow things. I can put on, leaves, stems, grow fruit, all that stuff. They're doing good at 5%. And if that seems like a low number, it is. It is extremely low. But the kicker is it is extremely difficult to get to those numbers. So, some rough numbers here. Let's say you want to have good soil, right? And you live here in Vegas specifically, because I know what the numbers here are, right? You have 0.4% organic material in your soil. You have about 1,000 square feet that is your garden. Now, how much compost do you need to add to increase to about 3%, right? This is going to be kind of crazy for you. And I'm going to tell you that it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 15,000 pounds of compost. Let that sink in. 1,000 square feet, you need 10 to 15,000 pounds of compost. That's to get you to 3% soil organic material in only 6 inches. Crazy. These are real numbers. But Dennis, how did you come up with such a crazy number? I'm glad you asked. So there's enough studies that are done out there by different states like Ohio State and NRCS, right? And how they come up with these numbers is they put organic material in the soil and they do testing and they wait for it to go away and then they see, okay, how much has gone away, how much has stayed. So when we're looking at organic material in the soil, when you add, let's say, 1,000 pounds of compost to your soil, only 10 to 20%, 20 is very generous. I like to stick around 10% of that is staying in the soil. That's it. That's all that's sticking around. The rest of it is gone. The critters have eaten it. It's gone into the atmosphere. Your plants have uptaken it. It's gone. So when we're talking about trying to increase the soil organic matter, right, from half a percent all the way up to 3%, you need a ton of organic material because that organic material is going to be eaten up by all those other living things that are out there and also get gassed off, right? It's a massive amount of organic material. And this goes back to what is the problem and why do you think that you can only feed a little bit of compost? You can't. You need to feed a ton of compost, even 3 times a year. And we're talking about bare minimum, right? Just bare minimum, just to get a little bit of food into the soil to get everything cycling. You need tons and tons and tons of it. Why? Why do you need tons of it? Well, we already talked about some of it gassing off, going into the atmosphere, right? Some of the microbes eating it, and also being uptake. It's also being taken up by the plants as nutrients, right? And that's what causes the settling. There's other things that come into account, like we kind of already talked about the critters and the worms and the crickets and the springtails and all these other things that are eating all of that food. It takes time. It also takes time. You can't just add this organic material to the soil and be like, boom, okay, great. Now I can grow all of the big, great things that I'm wanting to grow. That material has to start breaking down. You have to have the other things, right? The other three principles, which is air, water, and microbes. Because if you don't have those three things, The food is just going to sit there. This happens all the time in Vegas. I get phone calls about people saying, I'm going to put a bunch of compost on there all over this, half an acre or whatever. And then I'm going to top it with mulch and I'm just going to let it sit there. And I look at them and I'm like, I hope you have a lot of time because we live in a very arid climate that's dry. That takes away one of the principles that we need in order to have a living soil, which is water. If you're not watering it, you're not keeping this organic material moist, then you won't have any life there. There's no water there, there's no microbes. The microbes are going to be the things that are breaking those things down, right? Feeding our plants, tilling the soil, amending our soil. The microbes and the critters are doing that, but there has to be water there, right? So you got to have all of that ready to go. Not ready to go, but that's what you have to do to kind of maintain that system. So you need a lot of organic material, a lot of compost, but you got to remember that's just one part of the other four principles, right? You still need air. You still got to make sure it's not compacted. So stop walking on it. If you are walking on it, if you're driving on it, stop driving on it. You got to make sure that you have the water there. You got to keep it moist, especially here in the arid climate, right? Of Vegas, water is massive. If it's dry, it's dead. Got to have water there. And then you got to have the microbes there, right? If you don't have the microorganisms there or the other critters that are breaking all these things down, then you don't really have a living soil system. You don't have anything cycling. You have air, you have water, and you have organic material, but nothing's happening. Nothing's breaking down because there's no microbes there. You got to have all four of those principles there if you want a living soil to work the way it's supposed to. So, getting back on topic, what's the most important thing when it comes to living soil? It is soil life. It is the life in the soil, and that starts with the food. The food that you're adding to the soil. Remember, don't give the soil just this. Give it more. Give it plenty. You really can't overdo it unless it's bad compost and then it burns your plants, right? That's a different topic on compost production and if they're doing it right and whether you should or shouldn't be using the material to begin with. But add add organic material, especially if you're not at a minimum of 3% organic material or organic matter in your soil. Now, how do you know this? You got to go get a soil test, right? If you don't want to go get a soil test because some of these can be expensive, then just add compost. And it doesn't matter whether you top dress or you till it in. All that really matters is that you get it out there. Just get going. Put it out there and get started, especially if you live in Vegas. You need tons and tons and tons of organic material. Like I said, if you got enough money to go buy 10 to 15,000 pounds of compost and put it on just 1,000 square feet, by all means, that'll get you to 3% in a few months. Probably more like half a year, right? Because it's going to take some time to break down and get worked in. But this is also one of the reasons that off topic, not off topic, a little bit off topic, is why big agriculture can't get to growing organically sometimes. When we're looking at these numbers and you want to get to 3% and then 5% soil organic material, right? The amount of compost or the amount of organic material that you would need is astronomical. And the United States can't even produce that much, right? So that's why some of the systems are stuck the way they are, unfortunately. But if we're growing in our backyards, we're growing on a market garden size, it's doable. It's a little more work. It's probably a lot more work than you thought because you thought you got one bag of compost. You're like, I'm good. You probably needed 10 to 15 times that amount. But you got to have compost. You got to have organic material. Whether you till it in is a different topic. Whether you top dress, I'm lazy, I top dress, but I also have soil underneath already. What I really want you guys to take away from here is that a living soil requires food. It does. And it requires a lot more than what you think. Like I said, if you got 1,000 square feet and you're here in Vegas, you need about 10 to 15,000 pounds of organic material just to get you to 3% that will sustain a living plant. That's it. Now, if you want to get to 5%, I forget what the numbers were, but I think it was like 45 to 60 tons of compost. just for 1,000 square feet, just for 6 inches. That's it. So you need a lot of organic material. You need a lot. If you think you need a little bit of compost, you need a lot more. If you have a compost that's left over in a bag, you shouldn't. Go use it. Go put it somewhere. It is going to get eaten up very quickly. Um, and it's just one of those things that just we got to keep feeding. Don't stop. You can't just do it once and think it's going to be enough because it's not going to be. Especially if you live or if you have soil that is pretty crappy, or if you don't have soil at all. That goes anywhere from the desert all the way down to the Florida Keys where it's all sand. You got to have that organic material in there because if you don't, your plants are going to suffer. So hopefully this was informative. If you have questions, by all means, drop them in the community, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye for now.